and welcome to the Rally Point with Dominic Fielder, the author of the King's German series, and myself, Rob McLaren, the author of the Jobert series. Hello, Dominic Fielder.
Hello, Rob McLaren. How are you?
I am super duper, tickety boo. Each month at the Rally Point, we catch up with friends who enjoy the Napoleonic period. Now, everyone, we're recording the first 30 minutes of the gathering, but once the recording is over, remaining online with us as the conversation continues. This month, we would like to welcome Dr. Stephen Summerfield to the Rally Point. Stephen is a Napoleonic specialist, has written a gazillion books, a very impressive library, is based in Britain, and I have one of his most fabulous books right here that we're going to chat about this evening. Stephen, welcome.
The Grand Armée. Now, I was looking at the what you're kind enough to send beforehand, and in my sort of that wargaming naivety, the moment anyone says the Grand Armée, you're immediately drawn to 1812. So what you're going to talk to us this evening about is that 1805 Grand Armée, and perhaps
the story of the Grand Armée in 1805 is about Napoleon attempting to get some order out of the chaos that's been happening in the previous 15 years. He succeeded in parts, he failed in others. Right. Napoleon's Grand Armée. I mean, this came out of a discussion sort of last August 2023. Going for a walk with my publisher and his dog Mopsa, and I was trying to explain, sort of going, I'd got a fascination of the 1805. I've been compiling information and so forth, but I wasn't in a position to write anything because the order of battles and so forth were a problem. How the armies were actually organized, or the Grand Army was organized, and how it transformed, and various things like that. So it's again sort of like going, my publisher sort of said, well, why not do something like you've done with Hanau, Friedland, and so forth, and just deal with the orders of battles and uniforms, leaving the narrative of the campaign for other books. I was speechless, which is, as you probably gather, rather an unusual thing to happen. I was probably speechless for about 5 minutes.
Oh my Lord.
Cogs whirring.
He didn't call for an ambulance at that point, did he?
Oh yeah, I mean he was rather concerned so about that. And again, sort of like going, the polite version is brilliant, simple, and elegant idea. There were probably a few other words sort of in there. And then for the rest of the talk, I actually explained to him how it was going to happen, how it's going to work, all the various parts that need to come together. So these are the various books that I'd done before. Friedland, the Russia 1812 campaign, which is again sort of going its exhaustive look at the order of battles and the atrocious attrition over that period. Vilnius 1812 was looking at the ghost, the graves in Vilnius of 3,500 dead souls in there, and Hanau, which is because my first War Games army was Bavarian, and I've had to take a lot of stick from that, sort of going with Napoleon's comment about readers' ability as a general. So it's again sort of like going. I mean, this is what Richard wrote as part of his preface. And it's again sort of like going, it's more, the book itself is more than just a sort of compendium. It's trying to actually bring everything together. It's almost a assistance to somebody who's actually interested in the campaign. but also what I've done, which again I will allude to later, the evolution of the various regiments, how they transformed from the ancient regime to 1805, which is a fascinating story. So there's an incredible number of illustrations, over 700. I did actually count them. 31 maps, and then you've got flags and eagles, etc. It's bringing all these various things together, trying to actually open up this 1805 period to an audience that's only interested in 1812 to 1815. And it's a fascinating area. And again, sort of it's something that at some stage, I really want to have a look at the Austrians and the Prussians and the Russians and so forth of this period. So what I've also looked at is looking at the lesser known regiments. Chasseurs d'Orient, the Guides, the various German states, the various prisoner or refractor regiments, etc. Again, the other reason for Richard sort of saying about this is that these books take a horrendous amount of time to research and get right. And it was sort of it was becoming harder and harder because of how high a bar I'd probably made for myself to go and create. And I hadn't looked at the French army. The Grande Armée. This is, I would consider, the best army that Napoleon ever wielded. I've heard people say about the 1815 army, and I can probably hear a colleague chuckling at that, which I certainly do. Because again, sort of you look at it and you go, well, 44% of them were veterans of the revolutionary period. They fought during the Republic and the Marengo and Hohenlinden and so forth. Nearly all the officers and NCOs had seen service. So it's again sort of the difference between somebody going, oh, well, you've drilled and so forth, to actually see battle and survived it. And you had, each of the regiments had their own survivors of the old Royal Army, which was very professional, well-trained. And remember that some of the best people involved in Napoleon's army were, of course, officers back in the ancient regime. Berthier is the sort of classic example. The Grande Armée, it was the army of the coast. That's the English version of it, preparing for the invasion of England. So even those troops that hadn't seen service had been well trained over the 2 years that they've been sitting in the various camps. And it was renamed, if I could spell September, it was named on the march to the Rhine. It was again sort of it was trying to actually distinguish between the Petit Armée, which were the small armies that were in Italy. So it's trying to actually distinguish. So that's really how it came in, rather than actually having it as a grand name. Again, this is a sort of interesting picture, because again, sort of this is the proclamation that we're going to march. Well, they were marching on the 30th of August. On the 19th of September, he introduced the Voltigeur. And as you can see in the background, you've got the Voltigeur with distinctions of the yellow or yellow and green and so forth, and plumes. So there's a lot of things sort of in there. And again, sort of a Voltigeur really wasn't sort of to produce an elite company. It was that Napoleon had 30,000 men that were exempted due to height. because they weren't tall enough. He introduced the Voltigeur. He introduced and gave them the dragoon musket, which is a shorter musket, so they were able to actually fight. I mean, the only part of the army that probably had these distinctions and that were probably Davout's Sixth Corps at the time, going up to Ulm, even into Austerlitz, and so I doubt very much many of the new Voltigeur companies that have been converted would have had these distinctions. Also, we need to remember there was a huge amount of opposition to conscription. This was particularly a problem in southern and western France, which was still predominantly royalist. I mean, it's an incredible number of people that were refractors were avoiding conscription. And I actually think that these numbers are probably underestimates. But again, sort of trying to get these numbers, trying to actually understand all of this it's actually a very difficult and fascinating area from this. These are the riots against conscription. There was 119 between December 1804 and July 1806. So again, sort of these were refusing, going from refusing to actually serve to actually imprisoning or beating up the recruiters. Eagles to flags to eagles. This is again sort of looking at the problems of how to trace back the lineage of a regiment. And again, sort of this was partly what I've done here, but I've now started on a series of books on French flags. So it's going into even more detail, and there's probably a few things that I need to go and correct and so forth. But it's again sort of you've got the first 6 regiments, the Veil Corps. This is the old corps. These date back their lineage back to the ancient bands and so forth of France, going back into the 16th century. These are the ones here. You've got the 3 here. These are actually the daughter regiments that were produced after splitting those regiments, because they were at the time in 1776 4 battalions, and it was decided to have 2 battalions per regiment. So this is just some of the flags that I've literally recently been drawing. I've drawn over 500 flags in the last month. This is these are the line flags. This is where the flag book sort of emanated from. I was given the Hollander book on Revolutionary War flags, and it's from that I was able to actually reconstruct all the different flags. It should be noted this is 1792, as can be seen here, because the fleur-de-lis are patched. First amalgamation, again, sort of that sensible. It's again sort of you're splitting out the regular battalions and so forth, and you're doing your best with them, and you're spreading them out into the army. You're then adding to them 2 volunteer battalions. So you've got the blues and blancs. So you've got the classic order mixed, where the blancs are in line and the volunteers are in column. Again, sort of that's something that at some stage I need to go and look at. But again, when you start adding the volunteers, you've got a huge number of flag uniformities. Again, you can see here, this is just taking the first 3 line infantry regiments and you can see their ancestry. So it's a very complex thing, and trying to actually, you've then got two line regiments, one line regiment for the first line, which is the 71st in order, whereas you've got the second line has got two different line regiments, etc. So there's a complete interesting sort of changes and so forth in the second formation that was created. This is the first formation down on the right hand side. Those are then brought together in Brigade de Bataille, and those were then formed into the line regiments in 24th of September 1803. And again, each of the line battalions and so forth had a change in the flags. The sheer confusion, the sheer plethora of flags, the downgrading of their status, in effect, by having all these different flags, by having the problems of sort of going, some regiments weren't actually recognizing somebody else's flag as being French. So you had all problems associated with that. Napoleon had to start bringing all this together. He created the Eagles. The Eagles were given to each battalion and each squadron of cavalry, etc., but also to the huge number of other regiments and other units, even the Navy. Remember that each ship of the line had its own eagle. These were issued on, I should say, 1804, on the 5th of December. So that the previous painting is showing Napoleon presenting these various eagles to the units. I've gone through in the book and put in what were actually written on those flags, and we've got given number of examples here. This is the 5th line, and again, sort of going, as you can see on the left-hand side, it says 2nd Battalion. Now, later in the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon considered the eagle as so important that he only gave it and permitted it to be by the 1st Battalion, whereas the subsequent battalions and so forth had portfanions or simple flags. This again, sort of going, is a fascinating one, is Tirailleurs de Pau, which again is an Italian regiment. The cuirassiers had their own standards, and carabiniers, and even the hussars, which again is quite a surprise that hussars, being that they quite often would fight in dispersed formations, would actually have standards. So that's an example of a cuirassier flag. Dragoons and so had a different style. This is a guidon, which is again sort of going. It's almost like a pinch back or a tail and so forth on there. Remember, these were actually quite heavy, and they didn't really fly very well because they were so heavily embroidered. The previous flags that were used by the infantry were silk, and they flew wonderfully well. They were huge. And again, sort of going, if we actually look at trying to actually get an eagle, an infantry eagle actually flying, is actually quite difficult. Whereas on the cavalry, all you have to do is get the horse going at a trot, and then it nicely streams behind you. So, as I said, sort of going that the eagles weren't only presented to the infantry or the cavalry, they're also to the artillery, the sappers, pioneers, even the Black Pioneer Battalion, and the ringing artillery. And again, that's an example. The gendarmes and National Guard all had their own eagles. Interestingly, some of the best collection of National Guard eagles is probably in Apsley House, as it was presented to him by the French king in 1815, going, well, I don't want these. I want to get rid of the Napoleonic and revolutionary period. Also, we start looking at the eagles presented to the French Navy. Right, we're now into looking at the 1805 campaign. Austrians' expectations, the French would attack France. And again, sort of going rather naturally, sort of like let them get defeated. They needed to actually move their army away from their own lands, so war could actually pay for itself. Remember, Ulm is not in Austrian lands. This position had also been used previously in the revolutionary wars to hold Moreau and also cover Tyrol, which is an important and very fractious part of the Austrian Hungarian Empire. Again, this is the gathering of the corps along the Rhine. And it's amazing sort of going, we will go through this in other detail, but it's just showing you how you've got armies that have actually come from the coast and come from the north. These two armies here, of course, come from northern Germany and Holland. Napoleon's plan was to attack Mack further down the Danube from the Mainz to the Rhine River. So it's again outflanking the position, because it's rather a forward position, is Ulm. This again was the reason why Mack had chosen that, was that it would also cover Vienna. But by attacking them further down the Danube, it also uncovered Vienna and also cut off the Russians from support. This was actually a foot race. This is a lovely little way of presenting this, in that you start at Boulogne and the French, and the Russians start at Krakow. And it's basically upon how quickly can we actually march to actually support or defeat the Austrians. As you could see, the Russians were about 200 miles short by the time Napoleon had got to Ulm. This is the marching of all these various corps converging to actually come across and defeat the Austrians by crossing about here. So they've crossed the Rhine, and then going on to cross the Danube. On the 26th of August, Napoleon discovered that the Austrians and the Russians were planning to cross the Rhine. It's again sort of going, it's an interesting thing of sort of going that he wasn't aware. The Austrians had done a wonderful job of trying to actually get their army to Ulm, to that area, had done so much of the preparation work and so forth, and Napoleon hadn't really noticed. On the 28th, Napoleon marched his Grande Armée. It was about mid-September that he actually changed the name to the Grande Armée. On the 2nd September, General Mack began to advance to the Rhine, which again, getting into the position of the around Inn. the march down the Rhine. This is a fascinating area, especially for those who are fascinated by British military history. And I think there's a sort of silence there of sort of going, where do you think the Marlborough campaign? Where do you think the Blenheim campaign? Marmont followed almost exactly the same route as Marlborough did to get to Blenheim, which again is in Bavaria. These again, this is a contemporary map, which I was a copy of a contemporary map showing the routes that were stated to go and do, and the difficulties of using the same route for two different corps. And again, sort of going lanes starting off first, and 2 to 3 days behind Soult, following the same route. The problem that causes is that Lanes has actually cleared out everything. There wasn't a chicken, piece of fodder or anything else left for Soult to go and feed his army. So there's all those problems, which again we will allude to later. This is just a list of when did they start, where did they get to, when did they cross, and where did they cross. But also you're looking at how far they marched. And again, sort of they're going at 20 kilometers a day. That is still a very, very fast march rate, and is faster than the invasion of France in 1940 by the Germans. And it's a sustained rate over a month, and how few the number of rest days. Again, sort of like going a fascination of sort of going difference between tactical maneuver and strategic maneuver, and so forth. I've looked at in various books. This is a wonderful of Job, painting by Job, and again, sort of going. You can see on the pontoon. There's Napoleon. There's the chasseurs à cheval de la garde, and there's his staff coming behind. So it's a great representation of one of the crossings. But also we need to actually sort of also look at the complete picture of the 1805 campaign. It's not just about Mach in Bavaria. It's about the Russians racing to support him from their border in former Poland. Then you've got the other armies. There's one in the Tyrol, and there's also in Italy, which again were potential places that the Austrians thought that Napoleon would actually reinvent the Italian campaign again. And it also diverted the invasion of the Papal States and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. And also, if you look down here, is a very interesting campaign, is of course the Anglo-Russian forces that come from Corfu for the invasion of the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. And again, later, you may have heard of the Battle of Maida, which was, again, something that happened after the period that we're talking about. It's again sort of going logistic failures. It's again sort of like going, there are 6 different branches of the art of war, according to Jomini: strategy, grand tactics, logistics, engineering, tactics, and diplomacy. Strangely, we only talk about strategy, grand tactics, and diplomacy. We completely ignore logistics and engineering. And again, sort of going, Jomini constantly goes back and reasserts that without mastering logistics, the others don't work. The French army had a lack of trained general staff. They had abolished the staff colleges of the ancient regime. You also had the problem of France never having any money. So it didn't have the luxury of Wellington in the peninsula being able to buy things. And their promissory notes in the British promissory notes were backed up by real money. Again, sort of the promissory note from the French army was worthless. Then you've got here a quote from Maud, again, sort of going, there's so much good work that's been done just before the First World War that really needs to be looked at, because again, sort of going, the people writing then knew about the use of horses, transport, and all the problems. So many of us historians have forgotten how difficult it was to communicate. We've got mobile phones, we've got email, we've got cars. And to think that sort of going, practically everything had to go on foot. Was the Grand Army prepared? No. I don't understand the writings of a number of authors that sort of like say that Napoleon was prepared, etc. He might have thought about it as a possibility, but also the difficulty of disseminating any of that preparation would have then forewarned the Austrians and the Russians and the British, etc., that he was going to actually turn his back on the Channel and march to Germany. It's an incredible thing that Berthier, as Minister of War, was able to collect what he did collect in a few weeks. But you think about the amount of logistics, the amount of wagons, horses, etc., that you need for 200,000 men. And of course, secrecy was essential. And then you've got the influx of 80,000 new recruits that had to be trained on the march. And remember, a lot of those were actually the new voltigeurs, because these were the new inducted short people that Napoleon invented on the 19th of September 1805. Napoleon was little satisfied, I think, is the polite translation of the French, by the state of the army he found and transported service to the army. Even in France, each of the communes and the district councils and so forth were supposed to supply and prepare supplies, etc. They hadn't done anything. Again, if you look at the correspondence of the corps commanders to Napoleon and Berthier, there's just lists upon lists and so forth of things missing and things we don't have and so forth. But also, as I've alluded earlier, there was corps were competing for supplies and horses and transport. And there are many examples of sort of one marshal sort of gazumping another marshal who had actually thought about getting the supplies, and like Bernadotte stealing them all. Transport was procured at the last minute. It's not something that you can do in a rush. The condition of troops that crossed the Rhine was unsatisfactory. Remember, there's a saying about the army marches on the soles of their boots. Well, after a 600-kilometer march, you don't have any boots. Where were they going to get the boots from? nobody had actually thought about supplying the boots or getting them made, etc. Marlborough did, and his march to the Danube in 1704 was tremendously successful. And again, that's a representation of the march to Blenheim. That's almost the same march that Marmont took from Holland. The cavalry was in a terrible state. You had inexperienced riders over-tiring horses. The refusal of most French cavalry of getting off their horses. It was always the tradition in the British army and the Prussian army and the Austrian army to, in effect, walk and ride. It wasn't in the French army. So that created the galled and sore backs, the bad condition, the breaking down, and so forth. But also the other thing is that you've got to remember that horses need a rest day. Otherwise, they're not going to be in condition. You're needing that at least once a week, maybe twice a week, where they need to actually rest. Forage was always a problem. And again, sort of like going, the army, the French didn't have any money. So they couldn't buy any forage and oats. So went about confiscating whatever they could from the Germans that they were supposed to protect. So the Badeners, Württembergers, and the Bavarians. You can also see the lack of horses when you've got many dragoon dismounted battalions who were in effect waiting for them to capture enough horses to go and mount them. Artillery lacked draft horses. Again, sort of going, I can go through that at quite length. But again, there were two different ways of dealing with this. There's Soult's method of going, well, it's important to keep all the guns, but it doesn't matter if I haven't got any ammunition. Or Davout's sensible thing of leaving behind the guns to make sure that he had 200 to 300 rounds per gun for his artillery batteries. Of course, I would support Davout on taking that course of action. Artillery ammunition, the French army at this time was a real problem because you could have 4 different artillery pieces in the same battery. There was not a set number of guns per battery. The organization wasn't present, etc. It was only sorted out gradually when you came with the Year 11 system. But added to that, Davout's First Corps had Hanoverian guns, and they had a completely different caliber to the French guns. And then added to that, of course, Napoleon shared out tons of captured Austrian pieces after the capture of Vienna Arsenal, but also from the spoils from Ulm. Army transport, again, sort of going, you've got 200 to 300,000 rounds rendered useless because they were uncovered wagons. That's a huge number of rounds. That's enough rounds for one corps allocation. Then you had the problems of sort of going, if you tried to get drivers with their horses, you've also given drivers ways of escaping and deserting. So what happened was so many of the impressed drivers absconded with the horses. Then you had complete failures of the contract system, which had been relied upon on and off from the revolutionary period. There was supposed to be Company Brigade was supposed to have 30 brigades of wagons, yet only 6 of the 163 wagons that they were contracted and paid for by the French government were actually ready. Crossing the Alps. This again is a beautiful illustration by Job. And again, sort of going, you could see him dropping his greatcoat down on a stricken grenadier who probably served with him in the Italian campaign or maybe in Egypt. How much you believe it is another matter. So we're now getting to a position of the various maps and looking at where we are with Danube. Because again, sort of going, the Austrians were expecting the French to attack the Iller line. We're expecting here. But because of the mover and the movement, they were able to actually outflank that position. This is actually quite a strong position. And again, sort of going, it had been previously used with success by the Austrian army in the revolutionary period. So you can see the at Danube, the French crossing south of the Danube, and Mack having to turn his army through 180 degrees. Which again, sort of going, you think about the problems that causes, because of course all your tents, all your wagons and everything else like that are now in front of you, and you have to get them behind you before you can even start marching. So this is again sort of him pivoting, and again sort of going that you've got, because of the attacks and the problems that they had, he was quickly forced north of the Danube. Vienna, of course, is about 150 miles to the east of this, and this is Munich. So we are clearly in Bavaria, Baden, and Württemberg. So we're not in the Austrian territories. Various attempted breakouts, etc., were attempted. This is the Battle of Haslach, and as you can see, you've got a very, very small part of Ney's corps being attacked by 2 to 3, maybe 4 to 1 of the Austrians, and was able to actually stop them from advancing. This is Ulm, so being able to break out. Dupont's division was part of Ney's corps, repulsed the Austrians under Schwarzenberg. This is the same Schwarzenberg as was Supreme Commander in 1813-14. He was certainly a better politician than general. And the Austrians lost, again, more than the French. Again, the numbers, losses, and so forth can be disputed. You look at different accounts and so forth, and the French always overstating how many they've captured or the opponents have lost. So you can see here, Bernadotte has got and retaken Munich, which is again capital of Bavaria. And you've got the situation that that for Mack, it's deteriorating considerably, with Soult here on that outflanked the Iller line, and now can actually outflank on the Danube. This was a very successful attack by Ney, stopping the destruction of the Danube bridges, which was so important because if they could destroy those bridges, of course, the Austrian army could sit the other side of the Danube with relative impunity. Because of the breadth of the Danube, there are only very, very few bridging places. The surrender of Mack the Austrian army surrendered and capitulated with 30,000 men. And Archduke Ferdinand, with a further 13,000, surrendered to Murat at Trogtelfingen, and 12,000 more at Neustadt. So you had these pockets that attempted to actually break out. Well, thank you very much. It gives you a broad paint of my book that's over 220 pages that's filled with so many illustrations. It's not a campaign book. It's not dealing with a campaign with great detail and so forth. But this is what is needed to try and understand the breadth and the depth of this this fascinating campaign.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. Look, I think you've painted that picture of the struggle of logistics. Again, I know it's a passion of yours, but it almost feels like success without the materials to create that success. You know, somehow this has happened, not quite by sort of force of will, but it's happened. It's almost miraculous that this happened because the basic infrastructure to support an army isn't there.
It really is. I mean, that's the miracle of the French army. It's again building upon the veterans, the people that had actually learned how to survive, how to march. This is a problem you're going to have and come across, of course, in the 1812 campaign, which again sort of going is what people consider is the Grande Armée.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Fascinating conversation so far. I'm about to end our recording, but please stay online as we continue to chat. To wrap up this month's Rally Point, thank you, Stephen, for joining us. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Stephen.
For those of you who've joined us live this evening, thank you for your time with us. Next time, why not join us here at the Rally Point next month, when we will catch up with Mr. Christopher Main, who will be talking about cavalry reenactment. Simply contact Dominic or I for your Zoom invite, and our details are at the end of the video. And share Rally Point with your friends so we can hear from them as well. Any previous Rally Point chats are up on our YouTube channel. And if you've enjoyed this Rally Point, please leave a quick review. So it's good morning from me, and it's good night from him.
Good night.
Good night.